All the roads are winding.
Welcome to the show, Kristen. I am really excited to talk to you because I love animals, and we've focused a lot on plants in this show and this business. And you happen to be such a cosmically aligned with your Fauna Speak business name that I'm really excited just to get into it today. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It does feel quite divinely aligned in our names and the numerology and just our general appreciation and curiosity for these spaces and cultivating them. So I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'd like to begin by asking, what are your ancestral lineages?
So my family years ago, before my parents and grandparents were born, traveled over from Germany, Ireland. There's some English in there and some Scottish, maybe even some French way, way back. I've been very interested in my sort of spiritual relationship to my ancestry and also the biological relationship as well, because I feel like there's so many gaps that I'm not understanding, not just about the people, but the people's relationship to the land, plants, space, and animals. And I'm just deeply interested in what fullness of story I've been missing out on this whole time. So that's where I'm from, and some sort of amalgamation of all of those places.
Awesome. And wow, that even just brings up I'm like that whole topic is such a cool topic. Yeah. A lot of stuff like rabbit hole. Okay. And where in the world are you now, and who are the people of that land?
So I'm originally from Kentucky. So I was a landlocked lady with an absolute adoration for the ocean and its inhabitants, and particularly the orca whale. So it's quite fitting that I now reside beside the Salish Sea, right off the coast of Vancouver on a little island here. So I live in the land of the Coast Salish people and am so deeply humbled and curious and excited to learn and explore more about their relationship to this land and place. And I feel like they've personally been guides in so many ways on how to be and revere and love and be humbled by this land and this place and all of its wildness and intensity. So they radiate certainly a light on how to live here, not just in a respectful way, but in a collaborative way with the energies of this land.
Well, that's beautiful. So, let's get into it about animals. I mean, I'm curious to start kind of at a obvious starting point, but when did you realize that you were communicating with animals? How did it come to you, and what light bulb went off?
My light bulb moment was, funnily enough, out here on the Salish Sea on a different island. I was in Friday Harbor, which is in the San Juan Islands, and it's a hotbed of orca research, orca activity physically. You can see them from shore most frequently. Friday Harbor, Sea Shepherds headquartered there, all those sort of things. So it was sort of like a coming home moment for me to just go there in general, because these places have sort of been in my personal mythology for so long. And so I was with my best friend and we journeyed to this little bookstore, Serendipity Books, of course, aptly named. And there I stumbled upon a book called Communicating with Orca, The Whale's Perspective, which was written by my future mentor, Mary Getton. And I picked up the book, and it was really early on in my spiritual journey, and I hadn't begun animal communication at all at this point, but it was just a full body realization that this is the book I've been waiting for. And this permission from someone else to illuminate within me this not just but really direct ability to communicate with the animals was not only possible, but there were people actively doing it. I think I read through the first 3 pages and was like, gotta call this lady. So she'd actually moved from this neck of the woods down to Florida, and she was so kind to invite me into her home and tell me everything that she knew. She answered every question I had and then expanded my reference points and blew my mind even further, talking about communications with stones and celestial spheres and Sasquatch and her relationship to hearing Sasquatch call in the Washington Hills and all that. So yeah, I was startled to excitement through that process. And of course, the orcas had a huge hand in that because they've been my guiding light this whole time on my path. I think I always attribute the orca to really holding vigil over the light that I contain and the curiosity and imaginative parts of me, because they were with me as such a young one. And even films like Free Willy were just opportunity to connect with them and to be informed by their story. And all these talks of stories, I'm just so curious about animal stories too. And so I think it's pretty cool that Keiko, who played Free Willy, became a movie star, and just the magic of an orca movie star, despite all of the obstacles too of Keiko's life. Was just deeply informed by orca the whole time, and they shook me awoke and said, it's time to start talking to us again.
Wow. Love that. And then when you're talking with animals, what is it like for you? Is it like, hello, Kristen, how are you today? Or does it come through in a different kind of way? And how do you talk back to them?
I think the animals speak so plainly and naturally and a lot in feeling that it can fly beneath the radar of so many people. Because I think most, if not all people, likely all, can and are communicating with animals and plants and each other all the time. We're exchanging all of these telepathic things more often than we're not. And so to me, there are more explicit, hello, how are you? Especially when I'm out in the world and I'm trying to win over a cat, for instance. I love being in a cat's good graces. The initiations that they make you go through to win their favor, to be close to them, possibly even touch them. Oh my, So there's, I find that each species and each being in particular has a different way of communicating how they would like to be in relationship with you. So that's one of the most fun things about the communication process for me, is that I'll never know what it's going to feel like exactly. And yet it all feels, there's a thread of sameness between all of the communications, and it's warmth, it's mutual curiosity, it's support. It's oftentimes an assistance to us to get to the next level of understanding that they have for us. They don't claim to know everything, but they do have a lot of stuff that they're responsible to. And so what they can convey from their lived experience is likely going to be very helpful for us as a human species. So most of the time, I feel that the animal communications are extremely subtle. Plant communications are even more subtle, as we know. So it really requires just sort of a slowing down and tuning in mostly, and a realization of the potential and possibility of all these communications. But animals can be extremely comical. Some fish are some of the most comical beings I've talked to. Turtles are some of the chattiest ones I've talked to. Horses are like masters of mischief, but also so strong and so resilient. But I think I see the largest spectrum of communication experience in horses quite often. They just really range the gambit and have such a spectrum of feeling and emotion that's just so unique to each of them individually. So, yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. My personal introduction to real animal communication was through horses, and through reading a book about this woman who could communicate with horses, and people would hire her for solving practical problems because she could like communicate with them about what was causing them pain, why weren't these treatments working, da 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 da, and the results were phenomenal. And I have no idea what her name was. It was so long before I accepted I was intuitive and da 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 da, but I loved that book. So hearing you speak to this, I'm like, yes, it's cool. So when you're speaking with them, like, I mean, I feel like everyone listening has had some sort of communication with an animal, whether they recognized it or not, So like, people are probably like, yeah, I know, I laughed so much when you're like the cat, winning over the cat. Like, yeah, everybody who likes cats understands that. Like, that is kind of the intrigue about cats as well. We're all suckers for this, winning their affection, and then it's such a reward, a blessing. I say when I'm so blessed right now, when the cat comes and like rubs against my leg, I'm like, oh my god, I'm chosen. But so like I feel like everyone's probably got some sort of, they've had some sort of communication with the animals, but they maybe didn't recognize it as such. So like, can you characterize it for you? Like, how does it come through, and how might someone start to recognize and tease apart that subtlety of, am I making it up, versus, oh, this is like, this frog is like beaming information and messages, whether it's for me or for just whoever picks it up. Like, how I feel, so people so often are like, is it my imagination or intuition? I'm like, well, your intuition is imagination. So then how do we tease it? How do we know?
Yeah. That's such a fun little puzzled ball there of information. And it's so unique to the communicator, and yet we universally all share the same obstacles in trusting our intuition and the communications we receive. I think one of the main things that sort of can feel counterintuitive, but is just saying, I'm gonna trust this, and just sort of quieting the limiting thoughts and limiting belief systems. A main impediment is that people are afraid that they're going to get something wrong. And when you're learning to do something, it's not about getting it wrong or right. It's about trying. And no one's there. None of the animals are going to shame you for misinterpreting, the vastness of the cosmos that they've encoded into their communication, right? I think something too that helps make sense, especially in wild animal communications, is that there's something deeply personal and universal meant in all of their communications. So it's important to trust what you feel is for you, but then also to find the universality in it too. Because I think sometimes people toggle between those two things, and it can turn into a printer jam of the brain. So, and to maybe eliminate comparison to like, oh, what if someone else gets something different than me? But I find that when multiple people are talking to the same animal, there's a kinship between all of the messages that are representative. But the kinship is there. But then there's also like the distinction between the messages are representative of those people's unique communication styles and their interests and their experiences. Another thing that happens in the process of trusting our communication is that people can be afraid that if it feels familiar, then it's coming from them. But the interesting distinction is that the familiarity of what we understand, our experiences, are what they have to work within to communicate something. So I think, we can sort of rest assured that if it feels familiar, to trust that process, because they're working within the framework of what we can understand. And they oftentimes use songs, pop culture references. I find too, like the zanier, they'll make such a zany reference. Like I had an animal the other day referencing Flubber, the Robin Williams film from the 90s. Another reference to the coiled dachshund in Toy Story. They use these funny references that catch our attention, that spark our imagination. There's multiple reasons why they use those things. Maybe it connects with our inner child. Maybe we really love that film. Maybe it's just something strange enough that it amplifies our trust in that message. So there's a lot of different things to sort through as we begin the communication journey or deepen our ever present journey of trusting our intuition and all of that. But I think the most important thing is to, not like there's a hierarchy, but another one of the most important things is to just stay open. Also to make sure that you're in a space where you're not sort of forcing yourself to get a message, because that can also create an atmosphere that doesn't allow energy to flow a lot. And I think it's also important to know that animals don't speak from a place of fear, guilt, and shame. That might bring up those things in us, but they're not trying to heighten any of those experiences for us, even if they speak of something that's difficult for them, So it helps to be in that sort of love connection, knowing that they're communicating from a place of love. We open up our heart center to, exchange that information from them. And that love and heart to heart connection seems to really heal or move aside any of that extra static that we kind of bring with us from the human world. Basically, in the journey of animal communication, so much of it is about putting up a resistance to what is not helpful in the process. And sometimes it's like kung fu. Sometimes it's like putting up sandbags to keep the floodwaters out. But whatever you have to do while you learn to create that container of heart-to-heart connection and trust is going to be the most facilitating. Also, being outside, being in the forest, for instance, where telepathy is the main language, those immersion practices are helpful.
Thank you. I feel like you just gave a great outline of like trusting your intuition 101. Like that, I fully align with and support everything you said. I'm like, everybody rewind and listen, because yeah, that's beautiful. And it's also heartening to hear that so much of communicating with animals is just aligned with developing your intuition. It's like, okay, it's just like another step and flavor and playful endeavor within this bigger picture, because like you said, like we're all telepathic, and I really see that too. It's like we humans are inherently telepathic, and we've been taught that we're not, and or to turn it down, or to turn it off, or to ignore it, or to name it something else. But even my husband, who is like a data analyst who's Mr. Logical, understands that we're telepathic now. He's like, wow, like even he gets it because of how amazing it is when you start to notice it and accept it and then allow it. So I just want to like really reiterate that for people, because it sounds so far out, but it's like, no, it's far out that we don't believe that we're telepathic as a species, as a society. Like everything we think and do is like broadcasting, and also we're like, it's like it's amazing. So I'm seeing, I'm just getting really worked up because it's a passionate topic for me. But yeah. So like the telepathic portion, so important. So, I think like for me, I'm just gonna go there about my pets and stuff, because I think that's probably where like most people are like, what about my pet? Like, little puppy, are they happy? How do I help them? And like, how, what I don't know. What is your biggest message that you have, that you see running through the threads through people communicating with their pets, and like how can that be useful? And I know, just like I know this is like a lot. I'm like everything about pets because I feel like this is probably where people are most likely to apply these.
Exactly. And they're animals and yet they're family members. So you're creating this interspecies family environment and we have to be more strategic in our communications and they're teaching us about ourselves simultaneously. I think the theme of familiarity, circling back to that once more, is really important to highlight in relationship to the animals in our homes, our companion animals. I have never talked to someone who wasn't in communication with the animals that they lived with. But there is an element of familiarity. You're exchanging things all the time. And so, I always say like a good animal communication session is confirmation of what you already know.
I love that.
Yeah, it's only going to be a wild surprise if you're pretty much living in denial to what it is that is compromising your connection or impacting their physical bodies and all that. I find too that, sometimes the jokes that we make about our animals, are some of the truest things about them. For instance, like if you have a nickname or a song that you sing or, like something that comes up so commonly in your sort of like jovial rhetoric around your animal is describing them it so acutely, probably better than you could ever understand. And then I just sort of mirror that to whomever I'm speaking to. They're like, yes, we say that all the time, but they're not. The difference is, if you're not open or aware of how the animal communication process works or the potential of it, you're not going to categorize that as a telepathic interspecies communication. So I like.
A lot of people would probably think they're going crazy if they accept that without already being like on the intuitive path, like to the common quote normal everyday person, they're like, that's crazy.
Yeah. And, I love the example too of the yawn. The yawn's one of my favorite examples of telepathy because I've been on the phone with someone and I'll yawn silently 3,000 miles away. And then I hear them yawn and I'm like, what is that?
What the heck? Yeah.
What is that? And I think too, as humans, we have a lot more to sift through in terms of our experiences, our painful experiences, our fear of loss, our trepidation around passing from this realm to the next, all those sorts of things that are also informing and creating barriers around communication. A lot of people are hesitant to talk to their animals because they're afraid of what they'll say.
Okay, great point. Thank you.
Yeah. I that happens quite frequently. And what I would say to that scenario is like, I've never talked to an animal that piled it on, oh, you're right. Thanks for bringing that up. I don't like this about you and let's get down to it. And I'm ready to move on. That's never the situation. And I think most people in their hearts inherently know that. I think people inherently know that their animals love them, but that is a common question too. I just want to make sure my animal loves me, that they're happy here. And, I think of course they know that, but those are highlighting deep insecurities and feelings that we have that are more originating from the human realm and our relationships with our own families. And oftentimes, that animal family member is actually offering a more profound quality of love and connection, a higher frequency of love and unconditional support in a way that they've never received from any of their family members. So it's interesting because they're these just absolute beacons of light living in your home, but it can be scary to open up that channel of communication and walk through that corridor because we're afraid of what we might find. And it makes sense because when you go down that corridor in your familial human relationships, people aren't always being honest or authentic about the origin of where their pain is coming from. So you can be sort of hit with other things that don't entirely have to do with you, and based on your bandwidth or capacity to handle that might not
Drama. Yeah.
be right. But the animals, they just inherently know how to create space. I'm just always amazed with their discernment. I trust, when I talk to an animal, I trust how they present something. I trust when they present it in the conversation. If they don't want to talk about something right off the bat, I just find another way to begin. And then because they reveal things in the way that they need to be revealed based on what is ready to be unlocked within the next layer of connection and what that connection implies.
Mm. I really feel that because even in my own fur baby relationships, because it's like, how do I explain to them, like my dog, he's the sweetest little guy, love him. But he's not allowed on the furniture, but the cat is. And so I was already aware of his feelings of like, he makes it very clear that he would like to be led onto the furniture. And we're very clear, like, you're not allowed. And we know he gets on it when we're not home. We're just like, he's like, but I am able to physically. And we're like, yeah, but we don't want you on there for many reasons, And so I had a reading from someone and she was like, there's a message from your dog. And she's like, he really feels like your cat is the favored one. And he's like sad, like he's feeling like, and I was like, I understand, I get it. And I was like, okay. So even afterwards, I was tried to, communicate to him, like, look, I love you, like you can't get up here because da 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 da. And I tried to give, but even still, like when these kinds of things come up, how can we help our animals understand things that are maybe logical and make sense to us, but to them, they see like him, like she confirmed something I already knew. And I was like, this is why I didn't want to like talk to my dog ever, because I know that like he's upset about things and I don't know how to help him. It's like, so like how can we help our animals understand things when they aren't necessarily like logical beings, or maybe they are. I don't know. Maybe I'm like being short-sighted here. And please feel free to just, you're not going to hurt my feelings if you're like, actually.
Well, no, we all have our motivations. We all have the things that we carry deeply about. I've been going through a very similar experience with my own cat. She is wild beyond belief. I mean, she's sweet as can be and cuddly, but like wild in the sense that she needs to be outside. She needs to be exploring. She needs to be in her sovereign nature. She doesn't like to be fussed with. Both of my cats have just absolute disdain for the hairbrush. My vet suggests I brush their teeth. I go, yeah, right.
Yeah, you brush their teeth, vet.
I want, Dr. Sarah, I want to brush their teeth so bad. But I'm just not allowed. I live with the most intense beings. And
you also don't want to bleed to death. So,
Yeah, I want to save my eyeballs. And, so it's constant negotiation of the intersectionality of their needs and my own and my personal responsibilities to keeping them safe, to managing their health, while also weaving in their desires too, as much as I can. The process is really similar to parenting, I think. I'm not a parent myself, but I have felt myself being initiated through quite similar rites of passage that parents go through in bringing a young one into the planet. And so I can't speak to the experience completely because I haven't gone through it, but I think that I've witnessed this quite often, is that the animal will convey that we're in this sort of way of relating, or this sort of relational dynamic, sister to sister, mother to daughter, father to son, elder to grandchild, friend to friend, all those sorts of things. And those helping to understand and contextualize the nature of that relationship, the frequency and energy of the connection, just helps to alleviate a lot of just sort of first level burden that we can feel around having these beings in our care, having them in our homes, loving them with all our hearts to the point where it makes us feel helpless because we love them so entirely. So in the communication process, it's nice just to understand what we're learning in this relationship. So if it with a lot of us are in a sort of parenting role with the animals in our care, even though they're wise little elders living in tiny bodies or big bodies, big dog bodies, horse bodies, there's still an element of parenting or stewardship or shepherding, that is helpful to understand their needs. And I like the idea too of that intersectionality, because the same with parenting. Like you can't deplete yourself to the point where chaos ensues because the young ones have the authority, and then you end up having to sweep up chaos as opposed to creating nice boundaries for everyone to live in coexistence. So I think, I think it's nice I think that alleviates some of the guilt that we might feel around. And, my little kitty has a cone on right now. She had a little shoulder thing. And I feel so bad. She's at the door. She wants to go outside. She wants to be free. But I know that, she's in this tender space of healing that I think she understands, but her wildness always supersedes that, right? So, I think they understand on a deep level, but they have their own resistances. They have their own growth too in this lifetime. It's interesting with animals. We either, we've sort of societally gone from a place of oh, you don't feel anything and have no culture and language. Then the sort of opposite of that is to put them on a pedestal too and be like, you're all knowing and you're so much better for us and you're perfect. But I think it's somewhere in the middle that we're all amazing, incredible beings of light. We're all here for our growth. There's some things that some of us have down that others have down. And I mean, I'm amazed by some of the souls that I meet. So I'm not saying that animals aren't the most amazing creatures. I'm in love with them more and more deeply every day. And I don't even think that's possible, but I didn't think it was possible how much more I could love them and be sort of initiated into these inner circles of understandings of their world. But I think what the animals really want to communicate is that we're family, we're kin, we're in this together. And they're just trying to help us get to a foundational place of reciprocity, collaboration, symbiosis. They're sort of holding the space for us to, I feel like, grow up a little bit. So if we're parenting them, they're probably parenting us a lot too. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any personal stories you can share about the impact that your relationship or communications with animals has had on you and your growth?
Yeah, I feel that my relationship with transition and death has been heavily informed by the animals. There was an experience that I went through early on in my journey where I just had animals all around me dying to the point where I was looking in the mirror afraid of are you the Grim Reaper? What is wrong?
Wow. Yeah.
But this is actually a very common thing that now that I mentor folks and help other people understand and have support on their journey, I've noticed that this is a very common initiation on the path because, just in general as humans, we have to reconcile our relationship with death and finding the beauty of impermanence and really understanding it in an entirely new framework that isn't imprisoning, right? So the animals were extremely supportive in that for me, and it all all that animal loss culminated in the loss of my father too, which was an incredibly vast and multi-dimensional thing to feel. But it was, they taught me about grief and how important it was to emote and how to celebrate and create ceremony and organic ritual around those processes. For years of my life, I was always pulling animals off the road who had been hit by cars and, making sure they had a nice little burial at the very least with flowers and things like that. Ironically, now I don't find that too often, which is interesting. There was some sort of universality of a lot of energies coming together to show me how important it was for me to like transcend my perceptions of death, some lingering notions I had around death from the way I was raised and socialized and all of that, to understand with more acuity, more acutely, what was, what's really going on there. And I mean, it's just such a rabbit hole. I feel like I'm not even doing justice speaking about it just superficially, but, yeah. And two, because of the nature of what I do, I hold so much space for grief, for death, for people mourning or pre-mourning the loss of their animals. And so I'm so grateful for the ways in which they taught me to hold reverent space for that process. And it can be challenging being in the world and hearing people casually talk about death in a sort of irreverent way. And I'm like, oh, I'm just so grateful to see the contrast of that experience, the contrast of that feeling, and how deeply I want to offer that to others so that no one has to feel alone or isolated or confused in that process. There might always be some little element of the unknown, but to feel supported in transitioning to the unknown, I think makes all the difference.
Wow, yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. I never would have been like, I bet you she's going to say they taught her about death, but like makes so much sense because they're so much less riddled with all the meanings and escapism we've put around the only thing that's guaranteed in our life.
Yeah. And they, especially the wild animals, live in like moment to moment. I keep looking at moment to moment relationship with death. I keep looking at the deer.
Yeah. On my screen. Mm-hmm.
Near screen. And they too have taught me so much about, I have these baby deer that come to my yard almost every day. And so I've been, I do a lot of eye staring with them. They hang out with my cats, and I've been trying to understand their response of awareness. They sort of, like, we have the expressions like deer in the headlights, they sort of seem like frantic and jumpy, but the more I've been in relationship with them, the more I realize like how absolutely present they are and how present even their muscular structure is to be able to move with immediacy. And I think that's a challenge that we face as humans. It's really hard for us to move.
There's so much resistance.
We have so much resistance, and we have so much carrying behind us too, that we start to look back and then, so
pulls us down. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that amazing, incredible adaptability and swiftness and presentness of the deer, living in constant relationship with an end is so inspiring to me. But luckily on this little island, there's no predators and they're protected and stuff. So we just get to live in harmony. Yeah.
Wow. when you were speaking about that, something that came up was like, oh, are you also like an animal medium for animals who have passed?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Tell us about that.
Yeah. I talk to animals in spirit quite often, and I like to present, especially when I'm holding a workshop or event that's facilitating people connect and remember with their abilities of telepathy and animal communication. I don't like to paint these things as distinct. I don't want any of these processes or abilities to feel proprietary. I like to show how they're all woven together. So, I feel like talking to an animal in spirit is the same as talking to an animal here in physical form. Because it's all those communications are happening at the soul level.
Okay, cool. And one quick thing of like the animal and spirit, what do you also say that means? Like, say if you, like an eagle came to you in meditation and it's not a specific eagle, it's like, oh, eagle spirit. Like, would that be included?
Yeah, so there would be, there is an interesting distinction too that I'll share after the
Okay.
I'll branch that out because it's really fun, and I think understanding the framework too helps make sense of how this all flows, because it's, yeah, like if you yeah, so animals in spirit, I feel like the main difference is just they're no longer incarnating through that physical body. So they can refer to that physical experience, but they're no longer living it, right? And so the obstacles are different. It's a reflection process. They're in a different space. There's just a level of disconnect, not in a negative way. It's just they're disconnected now from that, and so they reflect on it as opposed to being within it and navigating within it. But it's the same soul to soul conversation. In terms of like there is, yeah, so there is a connection between say your companion animal has transitioned into spirit, and then the eagle spirit who comes to you. We can talk to animals in lots of different layers and categories, or we can talk to sort of an overarching deva or representative energy of that animal, which the eagle spirit might fall into that category, or we can talk to an individual ambassador of that species, which also eagle spirit could fall into that category. And then
So that would be like the deva, the overall spirit of cat, versus like my cat Tooch. Like, okay.
so you could, and there's probably qualities of Tooch that are embodying that overall quality, that overall cat spirit, but there's going to be ways in which Tooch also deviates from those things too. And oftentimes, I mean, very, very, very commonly, I talk to cats that aren't quite cats. My cat is like sometimes a goose, sometimes a deer. She's barely a cat. She had to learn how to be a cat from my other cat, who's like a tiny jaguar, big cat shrunken into a little body. So, also learning to understand what are the energies comprising the animals that we're living with too helps to make sense. And we can also see that in the nickname. Sometimes you call your dog Bear and you're like, oh,
Right.
there could be a bear in there, and that makes a whole lot of sense. So I live with a bear. Okay. But there's so much to explore in the interrealm, interdimensional, how all these things flow. I certainly, I get a lot of questions about, will my animal reincarnate? How does it all work over there? And I certainly don't claim to know the magic and mystery of the universe, because as soon as you put any fine of a point on it, it turns to dust. So I'm very humbled on the intelligence and mystery of all of these inner workings, and I feel like I should be. I don't actually want to know, because if I don't know, and that's for a reason. But I do know what I experience through the conversations I have. So all of these things that I've come to understand in ways to communicate have been informed by, a whole slew of conversations. So that's just the way I understand it, and I'm sure people will, maybe understand things in their own way. Again, like how, people have their own really beautiful lens of communication based on their unique skill sets and gifts and curiosities and all that sort of stuff. But, there's a lot of overlap too.
Cool.
So just to round out, we can talk to an overarching energy or a deva of a species. We can talk to an ambassador of a species. We can talk to a group from within a species. For instance, a certain collection or tribe of giraffe. We can talk to a certain pod of orca. And from that pod, there can be an ambassador. For instance, Granny the orca, who's now in spirit, but was one of the longest living orca that we know of, who's still deeply intertwined in both orca and human affairs. We can speak to her directly, or we can beneath that, not beneath, but if it's like a rainbow, right? A rainbow that gets closer and closer to us, to a more individualized communication. Beneath that, there is the individual being from a particular species that we can talk to, just like you and I are talking right now, would be that sort of one-on-one direct communication. So it's basically an infinite math equation. There's so many ways in which we can explore these conduits of communication to drive connection, information, support, medicine, all that sort of stuff. So it's really fun. And then you also bring in the interdimensional beings, the magical ones, the unseen ones, the plant, mineral.
Like unicorns?
Yes.
Oh, awesome. All right. Yeah. Okay. Keep going with your thought.
No, that's pretty much it. But unicorns are super duper one of my favorites and have become good friends. And they didn't reveal themselves to me until a little later. I was a little later on in my journey. I was not the child. I was a very pragmatic child. I think that was my coping mechanism, because I would probably have just floated off this earth. And so I had to ground myself in some way. So it's very pragmatic. I didn't have imaginary friends. I love stuffed animals. But the unicorns revealed their magic to me later on in their journey. And I call on them quite often with their abilities to so elegantly navigate interdimensional places, and their incredible abilities of grounding and also their intensity is just so unparalleled. So
I've experienced that as well. Mm-hmm.
yes, yeah. Sort of in the way that like orcas are intense too, unicorns hold a lot of that. So they've become really, really incredible friends.
Okay, cool. I want to go there more. When you call upon unicorns, what kind of, do you have an example of like a situation you might have been in and what you called on them for and how you called on them and what their impact was like, even, however subtle?
I think the challenge I'm continually faced with as a being, opening my heart more and more, opening my body and senses to even greater sensitivities, that does leave you oftentimes with this heightened vulnerability as well. That's why we don't do it. It's why we're afraid to do it. It's why we close these things off at a younger age, because we realized when we got down here that this was not the environment that was going to support those aspects of ourselves. And so it takes a whole lot of gumption, especially now, because we sense energetically that it is the time to come forth, but there's still a lot of resistance. There's still a lot of disbelief, or, something even more intense than disbelief that can be an actual antagonist, right? So, so there's still a lot of space for protection. And I feel very protected just in general. I think that just the very organic relationship that I've developed with my guides, I I don't always specifically call on everybody because I just sort of feel them all around. And
Right.
that's the beauty of, the longer you do this, the more you realize that like you've been supported the whole time just by like being alive, being in your body, walking on the ground, like seeing a butterfly. Like these are incredible medicinal, multi-dimensional supports that have been nourishing you this whole time, whether you realized it or not. But we're in a time where the valves are opening, the wounds are surfacing, the pressure is being released. And it is so delicate and so vast, and holding space for it in the individual ways that we're called to hold space can be quite humbling. And oftentimes I feel like I know that I'm not ultimately holding the space by myself, but if I'm the only like living, breathing human in the space, I think it's really nice to have extra support when there's a particularly delicate situation where there's possibly a human that has experienced like ancestral trauma, and then there's been an event now that mirrors that to spark that healing. And so it's just, I'm so grateful that the animals and plants in this earth have steeped me in the reverent ways to hold space for that. And also to the vulnerability of being humble within those spaces, I think is really important. But I think at those times, like I know I need an extra little anchor in. And so I do like to call in the unicorns, particularly because they are, again, so adept at navigating interdimensional spaces where I like realize that this is not just a here and now present moment sort of ouch. This has reverberations in lifetimes and in family lines and in societal spaces. Like it just spans too much, and not too much. It just spans enough where I feel like the counsel and support of beings is like such as the unicorns are very helpful. I also call in the whales a lot for those sort of things. Grandmother humpback. It's not like it's really cool because you not just have an animal, but you have an elder animal, a grandmother humpback, who's just a master of space holding and kindness and warmth. And she's just coming through so much in the past year and a half in all of my events and readings and stuff like that to offer that quality of support that we probably haven't even experienced in a human way yet.
Thank you. I have so many questions. One, what, if any, messages have been coming through from animals either lately or throughout your whole time, as a communicator about, how, like thinking of whales and how we've treated the ocean as humans? Like, do they have requests and messages coming through about how we are treating the planet? Is that something they get specific about with you?
They do get specific, but they're not as pushy as I think people would be afraid they would be, and again, that fear factor of, okay, if we open up these communications, the years and years of abuse will just come pouring through.
Right.
And then we'll have to hold that, and people aren't sure if they can hold that.
That's a lot. Yeah.
It's a lot. But that's never the way I've ever experienced them, because the whales are masters and they're elders and they know how to hold space. They know where we are in our growth and evolution in so many ways, like we're the children of this planet. And so they know that there's a process of initiation before we can hold those larger spaces. And the whales will be really specific. They'll talk about whatever we want to talk about. They're extremely current because, they're managing the energetics of the planet, and they're creating the histories too. Like they're making all of the records, so they're record keepers in so many ways, and they record those things in songs. in crystals and mountains beneath the sea and the molecular structure of the water and all that sort of stuff. So overarchingly, the animal messages are mainly attempting to get our attention, to connect with our hearts, to get us open to these spaces. And I feel like the main gunk and quagmire between ourselves and the animals is a result of just compiled shame.
Yes, I was already hearing it. Yes.
It has nothing actually to do with the availability of that relationship. And so I think once people begin the journey, they realize, I mean, even in the first second of like a whale and dolphin circle, which I hold monthly, and people have, for the first time, have the opportunity to connect directly and energetically in with the cetacean family, they realize that's not the case at all. Like, they're here to offer unconditional love and support and all that. And so, another theme is that they want us to know that we belong here. There's a lot of really insidious ideas in human culture right now that are painting us basically as worthless.
As like a parasite or a cancer or something.
Exactly. The parasite or the cancer, you've destroyed the earth, you're the worst. And the animals are like, no, 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 no. Please don't think that. They sort of like implore us because they know the toxicity of that and how that affects our psyches. And that's what further impacts us and paralyzes us. Oh, I get chills thinking about it because it's such a big deal. So we actually have to like live in resistance to those insidious ideologies that have a sexiness to them. Like, I understand, like, and I was subject to them too, early on. I mean, I had like such a desire, towards humanitarianism and environmentalism and activism, stuff like that. And then, but I was like, this isn't the way, like, I just continued to feel crippled beneath the overwhelm within those spaces. And so I was so grateful that the animals sort of swooped in and was like, come join us. We've been doing this for a really long time. We've seen a lot. We're here to help you navigate this. You're feeling overwhelmed because you're not yet primed for the task that we need you for and the task that you've come here for. So they help us remember our blueprints. The whales especially help us remember our celestial connections. I love the animals too, animal communication, because it helps ground us in both our celestial and terrestrial roots. If we just sort of, I love the angelic kingdoms, but if we only connected with them, we wouldn't get the whole human thing that we're down here to do. So I always say that the animals taught me how to be human. Because whatever I couldn't find in the human realm, it was there waiting for me.
Exactly. Like, I want to be and I just want to echo that everything you're saying about the animals and stuff, I just want to admit, like, I had my own inner resistance to really diving into communications with animals because of the grief and shame I hold around how we've treated our planet. And, my personal gift is that just I can't ignore that has been my whole life has been plant communications. And what you're saying, I'm like not surprised at all. I'm like, yes, this is like what the plants, their messages continually speak to our need to heal within each of ourselves individually, because that helps shift and heal the whole, so we can become the stewards and brothers and sisters of the animals and the plants, and really be in our place on the planet, be in healthy relationship. And there, it's like just so similar. And I'm honestly relieved. I'm like, phew, because like, like there is a lot of grief. I mean, even without just looking at our planet and with climate collapse and just the way, just I don't need to describe it. Everyone listening knows, it's a real thing. Like, this eco grief is real. So
yeah,
I'm just, thank you for, kind of sharing, elucidating that they're not here to like dump on us and shame us. They're like, actually, no, this shame isn't helpful. And, you know, that's a relief.
Well, they sort of like welcome us in as weary travelers, you know?
Mm.
You are malnourished, you are tired, you haven't been getting what you've needed so far on this planet. And so they work with us. It could take longer than we feel comfortable, that healing process to regenerate. We're like, aren't we done yet? Like my cat, like, aren't I
And it's
healed?
like a spiral too, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's, it's uncomfortable too, because we realize it's sort of like a forever journey. Because our potential is endless, right? So, but it's the same way that you would treat a weary traveler in your home, someone that you haven't seen for years. And we all know what that feels like because we have so many people we haven't seen in a really long time now.
I'm literally on a 2-month trip visiting my husband and my families that we haven't seen in years. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I know I haven't been home in over 2 years now. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I have such a deep relationship to my home and that land. And so
Weary traveler, here you go.
weary traveler, you bring them in, you feed them, you love them. You don't ask them to do anything. You have no expectations of them, just to feel the warmth of home and kinship. And then once you start to mend and sort of catalog what has happened to you, you begin to get back on your feet. You begin to help in the kitchen. You help with meals. Maybe you go out to the market and you bring some beautiful things home for dinner, and then, at some point you might actually be more fully participating in that, or you go back to your own home, or you create your own station, right? So they're really acutely aware of all the initiations that need to take place for our own growth and healing before all those things. And I think too, I want to point out that the solutions that we're seeking are so much more available than we perceive them to be. They're right under our noses. So, we think it's like sort of scheming and mind mapping, this huge complex thing. And the animals are like, it's actually way simpler than you realize. You're probably not even going to leave your house. And it's probably going to start with you. It's probably going to start in your home, and then that's going to reverberate out into your community. I've seen this like sort of visual for so many years. I've been shown about humanity and how we're sort of interlocked in this codependency, for lack of a better word, to the point where like we're all holding each other to standards that no one needs to be held to based on we don't even remember or understand.
Thank you. I was like, because I think about this too. Like, I live in Silicon Valley, and so I'm like, why are all of these people innovating, pushing so hard, like to what? To like earn their daddy's approval inside? Like, what is it really? Like, I think innovation's cool, but I totally just hits a chord for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like, one of the most noble and radical things that we can do is retrieve our energy back from those things and, begin our personal healing journey so that we can be of service. I think what feels counterintuitive for people, especially because we've been taught that selfishness is a thing, it'd be like, we feel selfish going inward. We feel selfish retrieving some things, or it's painful to, retrieve our energy from a familial situation where they're used to being fed that. And so there's a backlash if we take it.
If we have needs. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, there's all those sorts of things that happen when we begin that journey of retrieving our sovereignty, but it ultimately helps everybody get back into, I think, an order of things that's really helpful. So we can offer more. We can't offer more if we're a half of something,
Okay. So this is bringing up, I'm really curious to get, and maybe this will be kind of how we wrap up is, I'm really wanting to hear about like and if you don't want to go here, that's fine. But what kind of like environment did you grow up in? Like, and then how are you different now? And I know this is a big question, but kind of, did you grow up in a religious household, like a healthy household, or not healthy? I think this is really useful, especially for people. It just keeps coming in my head to ask you this. So there must be someone that needs to hear this so they can see themselves represented and as well. I don't even know why, but I'm curious as well.
Yeah. Well, it's a big part of my story. And it came up too. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm surprised I haven't once yet talked about my origin story and how I got here, because it's typically something that has either woven in by now or I lead with. But obviously I was born in the American South in Kentucky in late 80s. And so that's a certain climate. But I was born into an extremely loving family. And the apple of my parents' eye and all that sort of thing. What was the really like original, some of the original memories I recall is feeling different and isolated and alone. Although I was very social and things and make friends easy, I wanted people to feel warm because I could innately intuit what they needed. So from a very young age, I was filling in the gaps of what people were missing, or I was predetermining what it was they wanted from me, and I would sort of shapeshift into that energy so that it could provide what they were looking for, and I could be in relationship with people. And from a very early age, I wrote a little pamphlet, Why Can't We All Just Eat Beans? I loved animals so much that I couldn't even, not in a political way, I just couldn't even conceive of eating them. They were my friends and all of that. And I don't have any judgments on, people's lifestyles and eating choices. I do have obvious feelings about, the suffering of animals and fellow sentient beings within certain systems that I feel like are, have large reverberations on our society and just how we feel about ourselves, and how that impacts our bodies and all of that. But, it was just from a very early age, I felt deeply, deeply connected to the animals, and I would go to them for camaraderie, for sort of a respite. I grew up in a very religious household in a non-denominational Christian megachurch, but had a strong tie to basically Southern Baptist. And so all of the things that I do now for a profession were considered basically the devil's work. So that was a really interesting coming out. I always say in the South, like, you come out as a lot of things. Like you have to come out to your family that like you eat a certain way. You have to come out to your family that you're going to leave the state, right? You have to come out to your family that you've made a new fashion choice or all those sorts of things. So I got really accustomed to the like, okay, what's the next big reveal, and being the person that no one really understood. But it was really challenging for me to be in ideological discord with my family because I did love them so much. And, you want to be the irony of like wanting to be so accepted, but then knowing that you have to blaze this trail. And so it did, like, I've always maintained a really sweet relationship with my family, but it did impact our ability to connect through certain eras. But through the loss of my dad, my mom has become one of my greatest spiritual confidants and really travel mates on the journey. It's so sweet. We don't always use the same language to describe our spirituality, but I feel like she's opened up to the more mystical aspects of Christianity, which I'm really excited about. I mean, I spent my whole childhood steeped in the Bible, memorizing the Bible. Like, I went to a private Christian school, so everyday Bible class, every week, chapel, church 3 times a week, like that, that document is like written into my body. And so it's been really sweet to now not have to like live in resistance to it, but to glean from it the insight that is available from it in a more neutral way that I like was able to relate to the Bhagavad Gita or, for example, or whatever. So I'm so grateful to have experienced my mother and I's relationship mend through this really shadowy part of losing my father. So to be on the other side of that is incredible to me. I never thought that I would see that. And I think a lot of people think that those sort of transformations like aren't possible because they don't actually happen in the way that we think they would happen. And so it's really cool for me too, because the longer I do this, the more I step into my light about it and excitement about it. My family doesn't really truly understand it so much, but there's a big respect there. And so I think, on the journey, you get so much resistance until one day you don't. And so I'm really happy to be in a place now where I just don't get what I perceive as continual resistance. My uncle texted me the other day and said, I was watching Dr. Dolittle on TV and I realized that's what you do. It was so sweet in the sense that like there was a connection made and an acknowledgement had that hadn't really been there before.
Clicked for him. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's been really cool to have those experiences and to have gone through the tunnel. And I wouldn't have been able to go through that tunnel alone. I went out to the world to find my kindred spirits and soul tribe, and they helped support me in that really radical dark night of the soul when you have to walk straight into the belly of all that. And when you feel all the things that your family doesn't acknowledge, when you feel all the trauma and the ancestral lines and you're the only one looking at it. I've been grateful too because my mom has become my liaison and like looking at the trauma like head first, eyes open. And those are things I never would have imagined happening. So I would say from my journey, like, it was sort of like a no man left behind sort of thing. Like I never gave up and they never gave up on me. But we were, there was a lot of love to begin there with, thankfully. And so that was not typically the way that I expressed I've articulated my origin story before. So there must be some sort of cocktail of what you were sensing needed to come out. And it just came out of me in a different way. So hopefully there's something there.
Beautiful.
That people can glean from, or, it's just something. Every time you tell your own story too, it just gets something out there and you're like, oh, it's like a hairball that needed to come out.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing it. And then is there any type of animal you feel you embody, or maybe mixture of animals?
Mm-hmm. Well, I oftentimes feel like a whale incarnate. I'm like, oh, I've got that real Selkie siren thing going on. Every time I go to the sea, I'm like, my body, it's just going to walk into the sea one day and not come back. But I've always felt really deeply aligned with the whales, the resonance they hold, the harmonics that they cultivate, the frequency, their way of being, their kindness and hospitality, and like how they've mastered, again, this celestial, terrestrial equilibrium. And I'm constantly inspired by so many beings. So I'd say overarchingly, the whales are my sort of totem species. And then the orca have been my guiding light. They sort of like echo this intensity that I have that I try to tamp down because, being a sweet lady from the South, you gotta just tamp down that your like, wildness.
Take off those tampers. Mm.
Yeah, I have the orcas and then these 2 cats that are like, you're wild like us. So, but
I keep seeing little cat ears on you this whole time, so that's what made me ask.
Oh my gosh! Well, I'm very cat, and my cats are named after whales, and we have.
Oh my gosh.
We have this sort of moniker, whale cats. We're whale cats.
Oh, I love that. Oh my god.
Yeah, there's orca whale, And we call her Vaquita whale. Vaquita is a porpoise, but we call her Vaquita whale because it's got a cute, it's like Southern charm with some oceanic influence there. Vaquita whale, get in here. Supper's ready, you know? I deeply miss my the American South and those oceans. I swim in the cold Pacific Ocean, and it's like a transcendental experience every time. But it's so magical, and I was like, this better make me live 10 yeyears longer or something, because
or like 10 years younger or something.
you know, yeah. I'm like, yeah, because it has spiritual implications. So I'm like, I hope there's something physical here too. But most recently, I've been so just absolutely excited about connections with snails and insects and little ones, slugs, like, I mean, just all those guys, like the smallest and like the little insects highways that go through the grass. And there's an amazing conch researcher and professor, Megan Davis, who does, she's creating it's all these amazing hatcheries for queen conch down in Puerto Rico. And she showed this microscopic video of bivalves. And I was like, there's microscopic clams. My brain just exploded. So yeah, it's like the mirroring of big to small that is this planet that we're only just now realizing is very exciting to me.
That's so cool. Well, we're definitely gonna have to talk again, because I'm like, I want to go in so many different directions. It's really fun, and I'm really grateful you came here to talk today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This has been such a pleasure, and my favorite thing in the whole world is connecting with fellow curious, reverent beings. So thank you for the honor of this experience and the opportunity to feel the resonance with the people that this will be shared with.
Totally, totally. Thanks. And what do you offer, and where can people find you?
Right. So I offer classic animal communication services with your companion animals, as well as weekly workshops on a variety of topics, somehow related to intuition, telepathy, animal communication, all that sort of good stuff. There's always something interesting that's equally nourishing to our human hearts. It's a very safe and sharing space of connection. I also offer a monthly whale and dolphin circle. That's my gifted offering to the community and whales and the beautiful reciprocity there each month. And I also, a few times a year, offer an intro to animal communication workshop series if you'd like to really dive in, as well as one-on-one mentorships in animal communication and growing your heart-based business all times of year if you're ready to get down to that journey with me personally. And you can find all of that on faunaspeak.com. And there's an events page always listing what's coming up in the calendar. You can sign up for my newsletter or go to the book a session page to work together one-on-one.
Amazing. I think that was like the most clear and concise answer I've ever had when I've asked people, and I've interviewed like 200 people. So y'all take that template, please, because that was good.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe it all came out of my brain. It was like, bleh. But I think that's a testament to how much time I spend working, doing back end website stuff, which I'm sure you guys are well acquainted with.
Oh, we understand. Yes. Yes. Wow. Amazing. And of course, as always, dear listeners, those links are in the show notes. And we're really excited to have a workshop with you. And that's going to be super rad. So if this piqued your interest, y'all, of course, come join the collective and hang out and get to take this workshop. If you already missed the live one, you can get the recording, and yeah, get on our email list to get more information about that, or follow us on Instagram, but email list is good. Cool. Well, this is so rad. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, all the animal spirits. Thank you, listeners. And just, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. This was truly a gathering of many.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All the roads are windy.
Listen to over 200 free Earthspeak podcast episodes on your favorite podcast app, and visit earthspeak.love to learn about our collective community and workshops.